Well, good morning, guys. On this June 20th, I'm in Dixie National Forest right now, and about 2 years ago I made a video at the same spot where I talked about the plants you can find on these hills and cliffs, which are quite barren at first glance, but are actually full of life when you take a closer look. But I've since gained a lot more subscribers, and I think I've gotten better at making videos, so I want to revisit this place and talk more about the plants you can find on these harsh Claron Formation cliffs. So let's just jump right in and see what we can find today. Starting right off, you can see there's not that many trees here, but there's actually a fairly high diversity of species. I think the most notable one of all, just because it's cool, is this one, which is Pinus longaeva, also known as the Great Basin Bristlecone Pine. It's fairly easy to tell apart from other pines you can find here by the fact that its branches look like a bottle brush. And that's because its needles are quite tightly packed because new shoots don't grow too much in a year. They're usually pretty short, but they hold their needles for a long time. So you get these densely packed needles that extend a fair way up the branch and look just like a bottle brush. It's really interesting to me. I think most people know these trees for being the longest lived species on Earth, and that's true. If you call it non-clonal organisms, there are some clonally reproducing trees that can live quite a bit longer, as well as some shrubs and other plants, but this is the longest one that doesn't really reproduce clonally. But they normally live much longer when they live at higher altitudes on harsher areas. And this substrate, though it is harsh, which I'll get into later, is not too harsh for this tree to grow. They seem to really love the limey, calcareous soils in places like this. So they do quite well. And in better sites for them, they don't live as long, I should add, because they can complete their life cycle and their life a lot faster. So this one may only live for like a few hundred years total, but in the really harshest high altitude places, they can live for quite a long time. Now this is a Ponderosa pine, which seems to be the dominant tree species you find in this area. They can handle this habitat, it seems, fairly well, but they really like the sort of flatlands behind these cliffs and canyons. All those are Ponderosa pines you see growing up there. Very important tree species in the Mountain West. So it's no surprise you see it here, but strangely you don't see it in the Wasatch too much, where I film most of my videos. Looking more towards the ground though, we got a fairly high diversity of species, at least compared to what one might expect considering how barren these hills are. This one to start off with is Linum kingii, so I think king's flax. Just call it Linum kingii though. I really think it's good to use scientific names. See, it's classic flax flowers. This is one you don't really see in the Wasatch where I like to film most of my videos, but it's quite common down here. We also do see the Linum lewisii. We might see some on the way down. I mean, just look how beautiful this place is. This is the same rock formation that makes up Bryce Canyon. So we got some very similar types of erosion going on here. I think it's just truly spectacular. The air looks a little bit hazy. It's not my camera's fault. There is a wildfire to the south of us that's pretty intense, so it's finally starting to get under control. So it's a France Canyon fire. It's burned about, at least last I checked yesterday, like 7,500 acres, I believe. So it's pretty bad. It was growing really quickly for a while, but they're finally starting to get it under control. So I don't think it'll spread too much further. It's certainly not in the Bryce Canyon, thankfully. Another plant you can see growing on these harsh cliffs and hills is this one. This is Amelanchier utahensis. It's really no surprise you see it growing here. It grows all throughout the Mountain West. But on better soils, I think they can get quite a bit taller than this. Let's move on though. Now the Claron Formation, which I'm currently standing on, was deposited about 50 million years ago in a vast wetland complex in central Utah over the course of several million years. As this formation was being deposited, the Green River Formation was also being formed in some deeper lakes to the northeast of here. And that contains shale and coal and some oil shale and other similar rock formations. And it's quite a complex one, but this is a lot simpler and it contains a lot of calcareous material that was deposited. And eventually, some maybe starting, I think so around 10, 20 million years ago, there was a lot of uplift in this area that formed the plateaus of central Utah, like the Marigold and the Paunsaugunt, which I'm standing on. So the acaulis and other volcanic activity led to volcanic deposits on top of them that are much slower to erode. But either way, eventually these started to erode quite quickly because it's a very crumbly substrate. as we can see, and that's part of what formed Bryce Canyon, as well as Red Canyon, which I believe I'm in. Very spectacular. It leads to some hoodoo formation, which you can sort of see in the distance there. But also just these sort of cliffs and bluffs that are quite harsh for many plants to grow on because it's very calcareous, it's rather crumbly, so it's hard for trees to get a foothold before the ground erodes away from them. And yeah, calcareous sediment is just not so easy for many plants to grow on, but some manage to find a way. You can see quite a lot of them here. And this is Hymenopappus filifolius. So remember, this is a sunflower family. It looks quite a lot like Cactus douglasii. Though if you know what the leaves look like, you can sort of tell them apart. This is quite a common plant in southern Utah, and it seems to like this habitat quite well, so that's really good to see. I mean, any other plant species you see growing here is going to be a bit special. What else do we got? Now this, I'm pretty sure, is Oenothera caespitosa, but it could be some other species of Oenothera. It looks a lot like the tufted evening primrose you find where I live in Utah, but it's growing with quite a bit smaller leaves than you'd expect. This flower probably open up at night because that's what they do, or in the late evening. Their flowers are only open for one night, usually starting in the afternoon, and by the next morning they're closed. So it's 11:30 and it's still open, so that's interesting. Over here, I think this is Stenotus acaulis. This looks a bit like the Tetraneria, but not quite the same. I think the Tetraneria has larger petals that are shorter, or larger ray florets, I should say, if you want to get specific. And its leaves are quite a bit shorter than this. I don't believe this is the Petradoria pumila, however. That one looks, I think, has much smaller flowers typically. And yeah, it just looks a bit different than this. But I think they're all somewhat related. I mean, they are because they're in the sunflower family, and certainly in the Asteroideae subfamily, though most members of Asteraceae are in that subfamily, so it doesn't narrow it down too much. See, I think this is a Tetraneria acaulis. So we got one flower. This is a rather tiny specimen, but still, that's what I believe this to be. And hopefully we can find some more on the way down. Yeah, there's quite a lot of plant diversity, but it's hard to talk about all the plants growing here. Because I'm more used to the Wasatch, and a lot of these plants are actually, despite only being about 200 miles away from where I normally film, are quite different from what you normally see. It's really surprising how quickly plants can change over distances like that. I know 200 miles sounds like a long distance, but it kind of isn't. And now that I'm finally on flat ground here, we can see there's a lot more plant growth. Though the chemical composition of the soil is the same, it's composed of much finer sediment, as we can see. It's deeper and there's less gravel, and it's much more stable, so we get a lot more plant growth, even though it's still harsh and calcareous, which does limit it a bit still, but obviously more plants can survive here. One of which is this guy. This is Podentilla fruticosa, sometimes a shrubby cinquefoil, or perhaps I should say Dasyphora fruticosa, because that whole genus has been split up. It's a very common plant in Utah. It's a shrubby, hardy member of Rosaceae. It's not really in bloom now, but once they get started, they can bloom basically until it starts to snow, which is really cool. Oh, here's one that's in bloom. There you go. My battery's really low, so I want to stop this clip soon, but because if I stop it, or if I don't stop it and it runs out of battery, this whole clip will be deleted. Lovely Rosaceae flower. It's much more Arctocephalus patula growing on this flat ground. It's a tough plant that can survive many tough conditions like drought, rocky soil, but I guess the hills are a little bit too much for it for the most part. And there's denser conifers, which I'll get to in just a second, including this Juniperus scopulorum, or Rocky Mountain juniper. What's cool about this one is that it's dioecious as opposed to the monoecious Utah juniper, which is Juniperus osteosperma. So it has male and female plants. This one, because I don't see any berries, I'm guessing is a male. But I have to get it to, no, actually it does have some berries on it, so it's a female. The male clones grow at the tip, while the blue juniper berries, which aren't actually berries, signify the female plants. I'm going to stop this clip and start again with a fresh battery. So continue filming a little bit longer. Another common conifer I'm seeing here is this one, which I believe is the Engelmann Spruce, Picea engelmannii, but I want to get closer to know for sure. Based upon its scaly bark, I'm going to say that's certainly what it is. rather widespread spruce species typically of higher elevations and subalpine areas. But yeah, that's definitely spruce needles. It seems to be doing fairly well here, which is good to see. It's a little too green to be a blue spruce, which is Picea pungens. I'm not sure if I've actually recorded those. They seem quite rare in the Wasatch, even though it's a state flower, which is a little interesting. More of a Rocky Mountain juniper. The Ponderosa pines are growing quite nicely here. Actually, that's not a Ponderosa pine. That's got to be Pinus flexilis. That's a limber pine. Look how tall that is. I know I found either gigantic Pinus flexilis or Pinus longaeva at the bottom of these cliffs in my first video, and this might be the same specimen. Absolutely insane. I don't think I've ever seen a limber pine get that tall. Probably because it's a relatively cool climate here. Sorry, relatively warm climate here compared to where it normally grows, so that helps it out a lot. You can see some Procera speciosa stalks of years past. So that's what happens after its flowering stem dies. You can sometimes get up to like almost 10 feet tall, I hear, in really wet places, but clearly that's not going to happen here. But it might get a fair amount of water from all the runoff. Oh, this is just so incredible. All of our ground here is another species of Arctostaphylos bubber, some thick flies or bees or whatever, they're flies. Probably Arctostaphylos patula, but it looks a little bit different. It could just be a different ecotype, but so I'm going to look into that a little more closely, but there's not a whole lot of Arctostaphylos species that grow here. Dang, is this a species of iris? Must be. I'm not very well versed on my Utah irises. The only iris I know growing around Utah is Iris missouriensis, which is a quite widespread one, but this has to be an iris. Just the fact that it's got like its leaves are arranged in a fan, it's clearly a monocot, and it just looks like an iris. If you know what they look like, this is it. They have, I think the petals and sepals are sort of different appearance, so it looks like it has 3 petals or sepals. Yeah, those are definitely. Oh, there you go. That's probably the sepal I'm holding right there. And that's the petal. Okay, I'm going to figure that one out, but let's carry on. There's too much cool stuff to talk about here. This video might be my longest yet, so I hope it actually gets some views. I can hear the cicadas going now. I saw a cicada emerging, I think it was emerging from the ground last night. We're not the periodic ones you get on the eastern states. But yeah, still pretty interesting. Cicadas are, when they're young, they like to suck on the roots of trees and other plants. So they're a bit of a pest to some people, but they are an important part of the ecosystem, no doubt. And then they emerge and don't live very long. I don't think they have mature, or have like real mouth parts when they're mature. So they can't eat anything. At least the periodic ones, I believe, are like that. Oh look, there's some Procera speciosa in bloom. They tend to all go off at the same time in a certain place, though that's not quite the case here. They're not quite, oh yeah, actually, yeah, there's some open flowers they have. Remember the family Gentianaceae? Moving around a lot, buddy. There you go. Really cool looking flowers when you get up close. Like, they look like they're just all green at first, but then have quite a few different colors on them in an interesting pattern. Alright, it's time to move on. Now this is a better look at that Tetraneria acaulis I was talking about earlier. Well, I'm going to take my botanical studies a lot more seriously. And some more Linum kingii. Let's move on. I'm right now in this ravine that I never last time was saying was quickly eroding, but I swear to God, the head of it was definitely not this far back last time. So in 2 years, it must have, if I'm not mistaken, eroded quite high up. I'll have to go back and review the old footage, but it's quite interesting to see. And there's already some plants growing in it, which is really cool. But up here we have much more of a kind of grassland, shrubland type habitat in the really deep soil. Alright, here's another actually fascinating plant species you can find here but not in the Wasatch. This is Penstemon caespitosa, also known as the mat penstemon. It's so named, I think, very clearly for the fact that it grows just in this really mat-like form. It doesn't get too tall, but it spreads out with a lot of branches, which is very interesting for penstemons because they mostly grow like your typical wildflowers, sometimes getting quite tall actually. But this one, for whatever reason, adapted to have this like mat-like growth form. Really just goes to show that closely related plants can have very different growth forms, and that growth form is not the most important feature when grouping large groups of species together. Now, one of the things I was most excited to see here the first time around was this big patch of Basin big sagebrush, which I'm going to go head over to now. Oh, speaking of other cool plants, this is actually a fairly widespread one. This is Castellagia linearifolia, so known as the Wyoming paintbrush. What's interesting about, or you can tell, use to tell this one apart from others, is that its calyx is more deeply divided below and above. It's usually the other way around for these paintbrushes, it seems. Just so you know, what's interesting about these is that the petals are actually this sort of green thing sticking out right between what looks like the petals. Those are actually the sepals, however. So the petals are more leaf-like than the sepals, and they also have colorful bracts as well in many cases. Really, I should say the corolla instead of the petals because they're all fused together, so it's kind of hard to tell how many it actually has. Now here we have a rather tall patch of sagebrush because this isn't just your regular sagebrush, this is Basin big. So, Artemisia tridentata, subspecies tridentata, which grows in deep, rich soils in the Mountain West. In fact, it was used as an indicator species for rich farmland, and much of it was plowed under to form the farms we see in the western United States today. So it's kind of rare now. It's been growing along fence lines and in isolated patches like this, but it's the tallest of the sagebrush, or big sagebrush subspecies, I should say. Getting easily over my head, like I'm just about 6 foot tall. Well, 5'11" technically, but whatever. And it's easily get up to like 9 feet tall, but I think the tallest is over 15. It looks just like a tree. It's growing somewhere in Oregon. Now, also growing amongst here, of course, is 2 species of rabbit brush. This is Ericameria nauseosa, so known as the rubber rabbit brush. Also got Chrysothamnus viscidiflorus. It's growing over this way. Formerly considered members of the same genus in the past, but Chrysothamnus has since been broken up. And unfortunately we got some invasive grass here. Agropyron cristatum. Oh shoot. That's what its seed head looks like. I think it's still planted by the VLM even though it's non-native as a feed for cattle, which is really regrettable because it's not native and there's some great native grasses that cows will eat too. You really have to turn the entire West into a big cattle pasture. Might as well use some native species. Yeah, it's just so cool seeing all these growing here. I'm going to have to turn back soon though. This video is going to be really long, I think. Hopefully it won't be too bad. Now, one thing I remember from my last time filming here was this quick eroding wash. At least I presumed it was quick eroding. So I want to see just how far up it's eroded since I last filmed here just 2 years ago. So it seems like just on the surface it's been quite far, like way further than I would have expected. Even though it's quickly eroding, there's already some species starting to grow here, which is good to see. Look at all these exposed roots. These were, in the life of these trees at least, buried underground, but have since been exposed, which they can sometimes handle, but it can be tough at other times for plants like this. these plants which aren't kind of in bloom with that little purple stuff on them, that's Linum lewisii, which I mentioned earlier. This one you do see commonly in the Wasatch. It's probably the primary Linum species in the western United States. It might just be more of a Utah thing. So here's a head to where it's eroded. This might not be much further than where it was last time, but to me it seems like it's quite further, at least in my mind. So I'm going to compare it to my old video and see how much it's changed. Another classic western plant. This is Berberis repens. Talked about it quite a lot. It's the creeping Oregon grape. I believe it's closely related to the true Oregon grape, which grows in the Pacific Northwest and more northern Rockies. Damn, I'm tripping a lot here, but you can see how crumbly the soil is. Oh, this plant, which is not yet in bloom, but it's going to be soon, I'm pretty sure is Tetrademia canescens, because otherwise I have no other guesses what it could be. But it looks like it's getting ready to make some asteraceous kind of flowers with Tetrademia species. Most of them, they grow in harsh areas, but normally like lower in elevation in like salt pan, playa kind of habitat, like salt desert scrub or salt brush. There are several names for it. And so it's interesting to see it growing here so much because I've seen other specimens of it. Most of them are spiny, by the way. This one, there's a spineless horsebrush. But its leaves are a little prickly, and most of them, by the way, are not good forage, even though they're called horsebrush. Maybe horses can eat them, but I think they've poisoned a lot of sheep. I've been shepherded out west. Now here is another plant you see commonly in southern Utah, but I've never seen in the Wasatch. This is Pedicularis centranthera, also known as dwarf lousewort. It's not yet in bloom, and I've really never seen them in bloom before, but I just think it's so cool looking. It grows in pine forests like this. It is a member of Orobanchaceae, so it is parasitic, though its leaves should indicate that it's only hemiparasitic and it can photosynthesize on its own. No idea what it's parasitizing, but again, it loves pine forests with like pinyon juniper and ponderosa forests like we're in now. Very cool plant, in my opinion. I love all the parasites. Man, the flies here are huge. I wonder what they're eating. I got some Lithospermum multiflorum. So I think that's what species it is. It has yellow flowers like multiflorum, and that seems to be the most common one in this area. There's maybe one or two others it could be. I don't think it's Lithospermum rudderale, which every time I brought up Lithospermum multiflorum on this trip, I've also had to bring up rudderale, but that's one you find commonly in the Wasatch area, in the foothills. This one, though, seems very abundant here. Yeah, upon closer inspection, this is definitely Arctocephalus uva ursi, so known as bearberry, the most widespread Arctocephalus, because it's all found in high altitude areas, typically throughout the western United States and even the Old World in some areas, as opposed to Arctocephalus patula, which is also fairly widespread, but really just a plant of the western United States in drier areas that get a little more summer rainfall than the Wasatch does. And man, just look how much Flora speciosa is growing here. So cool. I love this sort of microsite stuff like this. Okay, now this juniper species is Juniperus communis. It's a highly successful juniper species found all throughout the Old World and the New World with many different growth forms. Like here in the western United States, it normally just grows as like a creeping shrub like this, though some Old World varieties grow as full-on trees, I believe. And probably one of the top 100 most successful plant species in the world. Now it's time for me to head up the hills again, but not before talking about this plant. This is a species of Physaria, most likely Physaria chambersii. Physarias are members of Brassicaceae that typically produce these inflated seed pod looking things, so that's kind of neat. So it has an interesting appearance. But yeah, one thing making this video show me is that I really know less than I realize, even as I continue to learn more things, because there's always more plants and genera to learn. and just how different this area is from the Wasatch. Even if I were to film in much richer habitat, there'd be very different plant species growing. But I think I've learned a lot, and I hope I was able to teach you guys something and make a video that's entertaining at the same time. So thanks for watching. See you next time. Thing, plants you normally see growing. Wow. I'm okay. That log just crumbled when I stepped on it. Okay, this definitely has to make it to the video.